So I'm going to talk about, is there a way to get less echo from the... Thanks. I'm going to talk about some of my, it's really difficult to talk with so much echo. I'm going to talk about some experiences with some of the key factors for high performance in some of the organizations that I've been involved with. It's going to be a fairly, I think it won't be a lot of news. What I increasingly find or continually find is that quite a lot of organizations fail to take the really optional decisions to actually set themselves up for better performance and not to mention better personal satisfaction of their team members. So these experiences are based on theory of high performance teams, but also based on the experience of coaching and training Agile and in particular Scrum in large organizations. So the title, designing high performance into our organizations. So what can ScrumMasters, managers, and other leaders do to help every team to excel? The topic was suggested when I was discussing last year at one of my certified Scrum Master classes in Budapest, and talking with the participants what they would like to hear, and they suggested that this would be an interesting topic. So, but nevertheless, I take the blame. A little bit about me. My name is Simon Roberts. I have a company based in Germany, based in Berlin. Scrum Center. I'm a management consultant, agile coach, and certified Scrum trainer. I've been involved in agile and lightweight methods since before agile was, or the word agile was really discovered or invented for this. So when we talked about lightweight methods, so since the 1990s. Last year, I had the pleasure of being here and talked about some of the work I've been doing together with Steve Denning on radical management. And just as a reminder, radical management, it's 5 shifts from traditional management to a new way of management for the 21st century, a more effective approach to help to help maximize the creativity in organizations. And the first shift is moving from stakeholder value to customer delight as the overriding strategy behind the company, really inspired by Peter Drucker and his idea that the purpose of a firm is to create customers. The second shift is from managers being controllers to being enablers of self-organization. The basis behind our ideas in radical management is that self-organization is fundamentally better for the vast majority of work that takes place in many organizations, certainly any organizations that are doing knowledge-based work. The third shift is that the structure of a company needs to change from what we call dynamic linking, so basically doing agile, to bringing the producers and consumers of business value together and doing iteration, so doing or being agile effectively. The fourth shift is a shift from a focus on economic value to values that are aligned in terms of what we do, what we say we do in the company, what we value, what's on the website, and also what the organization really does internally. And the fifth shift is a shift from communication through commands to communication through conversation. Now today, I want to focus on the second of those principles and look at, well, what does if managers have as part of their, or one of the most important parts of their job, creating an environment in which self-organizing teams can flourish, what does that actually mean? So let's look at some of the factors behind high performance, or the key factors for high performance teams. That's a picture of Berlin, where I live. There's a lot of high performance teams in Berlin. Berlin is more or less the startup capital of the world these days. And some of them, at least, actually take notice of some of these factors. So, the first one, trust. Somebody that influenced my thinking about trust was, of course, Linda, so thank you very much for your, I remember attending a workshop years and years ago on trust at Allianz in Germany that you gave, and really helped me to understand, I think a lot of people to understand, that if teams don't have trust between the team members, then it's really, really difficult to make progress. So trust is a fundamental factor for high performance teams. Having stable teams that sit together, maybe that's a contentious topic. So many organizations are choosing to outsource these days, but it does have a dramatic impact, in my experience, on the quality of the results. And I think it is optional to outsource. It's not actually. You can produce great results by not outsourcing, in fact, better results. And of course, high performance teams are self-organized. They're also cross-functional, so all necessary skills are present, and they tend to spread the knowledge between the team members. So cross-functional doesn't mean, there's a common myth, cross-functional doesn't mean that everybody can do everything. So, for example, for Scrum teams, it's not necessary when you're starting that everybody is able to do everything. But over time, we definitely want to blur the specializations a little bit. That doesn't mean that people should be able to do everything. It doesn't mean that they should be just a generalist. They definitely need to retain their specializations. Crucial is also diversity of cognitive approach. I think that's something that many organizations don't take enough account of. More later on that. And of course, intrinsic motivation, as popularized by Dan Pink, what he calls it, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. More later on that is really important. And also the concept of flow. And we'll come later to all of these topics. So first of all, trust. I was recently at a company doing some internal training, and what was really interesting when we had the kickoff for the company, the kickoff for the training, was that everybody was saying, we've got a fundamental problem, and that problem is we know each other very well, and we don't trust each other. And in many, many ways, it's a very inspiring company, but this absence of trust is really damaging their ability to make progress. And one thing that I've noticed is that there tends to be, in some companies and in some cultures perhaps, a barrier to achieving achieving trust. What my observation is that if we don't know personal details about each other, it's very difficult to achieve trust. We need to actually tell stories about our private life. I think as animals we evolved living and working together, and we're sort of hardwired to actually know personal details about each other. And if we don't have that, that information, if we don't have that context, it's very difficult to achieve trust. Some of the things that, for example, at Deutsche Telekom, where I've spent a lot of time over the last few years, helping them with their agile transition, something that we've done a lot are very simple things like pub quizzes. So ScrumMasters or other leaders will organize an after work, will organize going to the pub together, having a quiz, something that's very familiar for people from the UK. I don't know if that's something that happens in Hungary, but some sort of social event. What doesn't seem to be quite so helpful are the sort of macho team building events, climbing and things like that. But what seems to be crucial is actually socializing together, learning about the private lives of each other's private lives. And some people, of course, will say, well, what happens in the work environment, that's the team's business, but what happens in my private life is my business. I think unless we're prepared to actually challenge that, there can be a barrier to teams becoming better. So moving on to stable, self-organizing teams. The key thing here is stability. I think in most people need to belong to a team, want to belong to something. That doesn't mean that they it has to be a life sentence in a team. Some sort of healthy rotation for job enrichment is, of course, desirable. But in many organizations, there's a dogma of creating teams for projects or for task forces, and then when the project or the emergency is over, the team gets disbanded and sent back to the matrix or the pool or whatever you like to call it. And that actually represents a lot of waste. Without Agile, with traditional project management in this sort of mode, sticking to their competence. One person was doing the front end, one was doing the server side back end, one was creating the rendering engine. And within a few months, we definitely got to this stage, and there was something like a doubling of performance. Not that performance is the only thing that's important. So another thing that I would always do is to make it visible, another form of make it visible, and that is, for example, with pair programming, you can stick a matrix on the wall. You can create it with post-its, perhaps with the names of the people horizontally, the names of the people vertically, and then ask every time somebody pairs with somebody else to put a sticky dot or a post-it or something like that at that location, and then that provides the data for the team to actually reflect on that at the retrospective and decide on the next step. So a few ideas. Now, what managers can do, of course, is to give permission. And managers need to get, if they're in the mode of sort of thinking that they need to know how long did each individual engineering task take, and who did that, and measuring individual performance, then they need to rapidly get out of that sort of mode. And that's, I think, an important impediment that Scrum Masters need to grab and use their full powers of persuasion, for example, storytelling, to help managers to understand that there's another way. So it's not just for programming. It's also for other work. At Deutsche Telekom, a company called Interactive Media, which is in fact an advertising sales company. Deutsche Telekom owns a large portfolio of advertising space on portals, on buildings, and so on, actually the largest in Europe. And we did agile training and coaching with them, and they took on board this idea of pair working, and they found that creating cross-functional teams, pair working in terms of how they actually sell and then provide service to their clients. Their clients are the advertising agencies in Madison Avenue, New York City. That actually improved
made it more fun to work and actually improved performance considerably. Cognitive diversity. In organizations generally, I think there's a culture, in most organizations, there's a culture of employing people who are similar to, or managers tend to hire people who are similar to themselves from a personality point of view. And actually, for high-performance teams, we need a mixture of different people. People who fundamentally tick differently. Now, you can overdo it. You can, if you have people over here and other people over here, for example, there's a personality. Well, it's related to personality. It's a scale which measures your natural innovation style called the Curtin Adapter Innovator Scale. There are people over here who are pure adapters. They're capable of, they're only capable of inventing new or of innovation based on tiny or little increments or adaptations of what's already there. And there are other people over here who are only able to throw everything away and start again. Now, if you have those people in a team and not people in the middle, then they will drive each other crazy. So you can overdo it. But we need to find a way in which we can build teams with more diversity. And it's a contentious topic because the tests like Myers-Briggs, which seems to have no scientific basis, and other tests, most of the tests based on the work for, I guess over 100 years now from Carl Jung, don't have much scientific basis behind them or not rigorous, and are used to make decisions about what people are allowed to do, and that's not okay. But what I do quite often with teams is to use a very lightweight personality test that, in fact, I got to hear about from a Scrum Master at Google. She's a Scrum Master at one of the Google email team or Google Mail teams. And if you have a team with trust, in the context of a retrospective where people would be interested in finding out more about their personality and how others see them, it's a sort of thing that you can actually do within an agile team. And then the team can reflect on that and use that to look at how can we actually make sure that we're covering all the bases. The research that Scott Page shows in his great book, The Difference, shows very, very clearly that actually having the top technical skills in a team is not the most important thing. Having cognitive diversity is more important. So diverse teams continually, consistently, not every time, of course, but consistently outperform teams that are diverse. Sorry, consistently outperform teams that have hand-picked specialists. So I think there's a dilemma here. As an agilist, I believe fundamentally in a participatory approach to introducing agile to teams, and I believe fundamentally in treating people as adults. The team decides. The Scrum Master doesn't decide, for example, how a Scrum team, what a Scrum team does. The team decides. But so one part of me says that organizations should actually decide who should be in what team based on, or the team members themselves should decide who should be in what team, in which team. So the idea is if you're transforming a business unit to agile, and you've got perhaps enough people for 5 or 6 agile teams, you'd gather them all together in a room, explain the basis of the cross-functional teams and so on, and then ask them to divide themselves up into teams. The problem is, though, I think there is a dilemma here that they will probably, in many cases, go for harmony rather than the necessary creative conflict that you can get by having a mixture teams. And I don't have a solution necessarily, except perhaps to help them to understand, first of all, their personality types, which, as I said, is contentious. Has anybody got any ideas on how do you decide who should be in what team? How do you maximize cognitive diversity in your teams? Linda? Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, and so I think, as Linda just said, have more women is my understanding, and I think there was an article recently in the Harvard Business Review that showed very clearly that the key factor is actually more women. So diversity is one of the dimensions of diversity, I guess, but it's a very, very important one. Any other comments? Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
For example, if you want to create a gym, you need somebody who will say that going to the gym is absolutely a waste of time. You need somebody who goes to the gym 5 days a week, but not somebody who goes only once a week.
Yeah.
So you need this type of diversity as well.
So you need skeptics and true believers. And I'm reminded of one of the fearless change patterns, of course, champion skeptic, which was always my favorite pattern. Having somebody who's prepared to say, well, that can't work, to bring up the potential problems, the pitfalls in a meeting, for example, or even in a team setting, can be advantageous. Again, it can be overdone, I guess. So diversity is really, really important. The next one, intrinsic motivation. Now, of course, it's not just intrinsic motivation, also extrinsic motivation is important, but my assumption is that the things that people need to motivate them extrinsically, the things from outside, are fundamentally taken care of. Like they've got enough to drink and eat, and that money is not, they're not continuously thinking about money because they're being paid enough. And they're being paid enough in comparison to people doing similar jobs. So different other theories of motivation are also important. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, equity theory, and so on is important. But I think that the motivational model that's really inspired me is self-determination theory, and I think this is where Dan Pink, in his book Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, took a lot of his ideas from, is that so autonomy in terms of being the masters of our own destiny as a team, in particular, being not continually dependent on other people outside of the team to generate business value, to do the work. This is really crucial. Now, you get that through having a true cross-functional team, but then many organizations then break it by saying, well, okay, you've got to send your intermediate results up to some other organizational entity for approval. Now, for example, a lot of companies have a design department, and in one particular case, so it's a true story based with the names protected to protect the innocent and the guilty, but there's a certain company has a design department. The design department thinks they think they're really good. They think they're as good as Johnny Ive and his group of people, because they're not. Nobody's as good as them, I guess. And the creative directors insist on reviewing the product design, not the technical design, but the product design of a lot of applications. And first of all, this introduces a bottleneck. It delays progress. But also, there are great designers in the team. And of course, that is an injury to the autonomy of the team. This is what we mean by autonomy in this context. It's really important that not only are the skills in the team to do the job, but actually that you trust the people to do that job without having to continuously refer the intermediate results to others. There's obviously other examples in a similar vein. Mastery, or as I think it's called in self-determination theory, competence. So, making sure that people have the right skills, having a good development path, but also awakening the joy of learning new things. As knowledge workers, we need to treat ourselves as craftspeople. And we need to be, craftspeople are responsible for sharpening their own tools. One of my grandfathers in around 1880, he was doing his apprenticeship to be a carpenter. And one of the first things he had to do was to make his own tools. I've inherited those tools, and they're amazing. So amazing woodworking tools that, well over 100 years later are still fantastic. Now, I'm not saying that every knowledge worker needs to create their own development environment or their own text editor or whatever it is, but they do need to take into their own hands some of the responsibility for improving those skills. And the sorts of things that you can do as a Scrum Master, as a manager, or as another person in some sort of leadership role, are to do things like holding coding dojos inside your company, or holding hackathons. I think there's going to be a talk from Log Me In later on how they've been using hackathons to help to drive innovation. But it can actually help people to understand that that they need to take some of the responsibility for improving their skills into their own hands. In most cities of the world these days, there's a huge number of meetups, so people coming together, learning new skills by taking part in coding dojos where they do pair programming in a social environment with beer and pizza and fun, and they program a hangman game or something like that. So as a Scrum Master, try to make your team aware of these things. Maybe they're not even aware of that. That's what great Agile developers do, for example. And finally, purpose. Purpose, I think, is really important. We need to believe in what we're doing. We need to be proud of what we're doing. Now, if we're a development team creating a heart pacemaker, it doesn't mean we have to be a potential customer. But we can still, hopefully we won't be a potential customer for that, a potential user. But we can still be proud of our professional ethics. We can actually be proud of the high quality solutions that we're creating. But I think it goes further than that. It's also important, for example, that as a Scrum Master, you coach your product owner to allow the team to have great ideas, to also have the team to propose features to be put into the product, because they're creative people, and they will very often have great ideas. So the company Immobilien Scout in Germany, it's the company that has the leading property portal in Germany. It's a real estate portal. They've built that into the sort of Bill of Rights for developers. So they say that developers don't just develop, they also are involved in discovery. And I was very inspired by the product owner of a similar real estate portal in Budapest. And she was telling us in these, I think, a product owner class that we held last year, that she allows a number of story points for each sprint where the team can decide what should actually be included in the product. I think that's a great way to do it. Of course, as a product owner, you have to have a sorry, almost went into German there. You have to have a right of veto on that because you're responsible for the conceptual integrity of the product. But try to make sure that we don't go back to the old Tayloristic idea of teams just being the realizers, the people who have to do the doing, and other people do the thinking. Another key factor for intrinsic motivation is flow. I probably need some help in saying his name, but I'm going to try it. So the great Hungarian psychologist, Csikszentmihalyi, almost approximately right, hopefully. His discovery that that flow is really crucial, and I think there's an emerging understanding that flow is not just for individuals; it's also for teams, and that the key things that as leaders we can do are to have clear goals and then to give immediate feedback, but also to have this balance between opportunity and capacity, so that we're not just doing things that are easy for us. They need to be goals that are stretched. They need to be challenges, things that we are capable of achieving, but we have to actually put some effort into it. And of course, sustaining that is really challenging, but important. Okay, so we've looked at some of the key factors. Just to wrap up some of them, is a few ideas. Easy things to try out. First of all, create a stable team. Just one is good enough to start. If you have a culture within your organization of creating project-specific teams, and then when the project is finished, dissolving the team, try just creating one team and see what happens. Make it stable and see what happens. Next thing is allow people, give permission to do pair working. Tell stories about what other teams did with pair programming or other types of pair working, and make sure as managers, make sure your managers, or if you're a manager yourself, that you give permission to do that. Again, just make it an experiment. Try it out. See what happens. And finally, try building in cognitive diversity. Now, I think your reflective managers, often the people responsible for making hiring decisions about or choosing who will be in what teams, so staffing teams, are the line managers or functional managers of the workers. But try, when you're creating stable teams, try to use your instinct to staff them with people who have the right sort of cognitive diversity, so a diverse set of different types of personality. So I think those are three things that are quite easy to try. You don't have to have a revolution. You can actually do it for one team or a few teams and then see what happens. Thank you very much. Do we have any time for questions? Yeah. Okay. Questions, comments, or anything else? Are there any factors, important factors for high performance that I've missed? So what are the other things that can block trust and how to overcome them? Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I have a friend who is an expert, and I would refer you to him. So Olaf Lewitz, based in Germany, and as nickname, he calls himself the Trust Artist. I think his website is trustartist.com, and he's got some ideas on how to do that. And in fact, I'm looking at working together with him at this client I was talking about earlier, where they've got a trust problem. Now they have one thing that they do is that he does all together with a colleague, is that they run a workshop which I think is called Temenos, where they tell stories to each other and go right back into childhood about what happened, and it needs, of course, a very carefully constructed, safe environment to do that type of thing. So as an amateur in that particular thing, I wouldn't do it on my own. It needs professional help. Has anybody got any ideas on how to build trust? I remember actually one thing from your talk from years ago, Linda, is that it stuck with me, is that you don't need to like the people that you're working with, but you need to trust them. Great, thank you. So Jim McCarthy, and I think his big project over the last few years has been the core protocols. Is that? Yep. Yep. Software for your head, great. And maybe slightly in a sort of slightly similar vein is the retrospective prime directive, which I think is a really important way of helping a team to get into a safer space in which they can talk about difficult problems. The prime directive, forgive me if I misquote it slightly, but we understand and we truly believe that everybody did the best they could in the context of the situation at hand, their skills and abilities. Now, even if we think we know who was to blame for the mess that we got ourselves into, for example, if it was a mess, if we say that, if we actually go through the ritual of reading that to ourselves, if the Scrum Master or the other retrospective facilitator presents that, writes that neatly on a flip chart, and helps people or reminds people of that at the start of a retrospective, we can actually trick our brains into getting closer to truly believing it and making it a slightly safer space in which to talk about problems of trust, for example.
My question is serious. I learned from coaching SMEs that the team learned to trust each other professionally quite fast, and the management learned to trust the team after that quite fast as well. But what took me a long time, and usually is the biggest challenge, is that teaching the team to trust the management as well. So that I started to write some variation of the Agile Manifesto for employees, how to handle the management, how to handle the management, and that kind of trust is much harder to build than actually the trust between the team or from the management towards the team. And if you could please comment on the point balancing opportunity and capacity, I didn't really get what the point was there.
But very good point that trust is a two-way thing. It's not just between management and team. It's not just that management needs to trust the team, and even that the team members need to trust each other. The team needs to trust management. as well. I totally agree with you. Balancing opportunity and challenge. It's about having tasks which are, at least having some tasks which are not too easy, where we actually have to stretch ourselves a little bit. So I think, I do see this happen with Agile teams after they've been together for quite a long time, maybe 20 sprints or whatever, then it becomes a little bit too much of a routine. And I think by enabling the team, for example, to choose some of the product backlog items, if we're using Scrum, themselves, within limits, can help.
So pushing them to the comfort zone.
Yeah. So not actually out of their comfort zone, but something where they have to actually learn new technologies, learn new things. So not pushing them, because pushing is always counterproductive, I think, but creating an environment in which they're able to actually embrace new challenges is very important there. I think there's a talk on flow later, and from Daniel Collier, as far as I remember, I saw that in the program, so maybe that be something to look at.
I think what is important to have some time for self-reflection and to build the culture of continuous improvements. I think it's important to have this high-performance team.
Time for self-reflection. So, yes.
That's just a comment.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. So I guess, can we have one more question, and then I guess we're out of time? Is that? Yep. Or one.
You talked about autonomy in teams, and you already mentioned that you do have some design departments which were like a central entity. We do have this too. So sometimes you have QAs, you have design, you have architects. How do you solve this? So if you're in the flow, your autonomy is very good. And then there comes this design people saying, okay, I want to improve, check this. How do you solve this?
Well, great question. I mean, and I'd like to really go back to another example outside design, and then use that as an example, maybe a pattern that one can reuse. Once upon a time, there was a company with a team of database experts who were the only people who were allowed to make changes to the mission critical data warehouse in the company. But almost every team, almost every development team, almost every iteration or sprint needed to make changes to the team, to that database, and had the capability to do that. They had some basic knowledge, at least, about that. So, of course, that was a bottleneck in terms of, that was a very much an example of waste in terms of handing over work from one team to another, but also, and it was a bottleneck, but also it was an injury to the autonomy of the team. Now, what we did was took several months to persuade people to give this a try. This team was transformed into a team of database coaches, who were then embedded with development teams for 1 or 2 sprints, and had the job of helping bring the team up, the level of the team up. If you had enough database experts, you just embed one in every team, and then your problem would be solved. And they're still allowed to talk to each other as database experts through a community of practice, or as it's called at Spotify, for example, a chapter or a guild, depending on the level. And then things can work out very well. But then in addition, in fact, in this particular case, there weren't enough people to embed them in every team. That we helped them to have a new mission, and that was to be a database coach. They were embedded within the teams for 1 or 2 sprints. They brought the levels of the teams up, and then they retained their existence as their identity as a team, and they were then available as consultants. So when teams had problems with the database, so performance problems, they could actually hire that team of consultants to help do some troubleshooting. So I would humbly suggest that could be a model for a design team. In the particular company I was, sorry?
Did it work at your team? We do this sort of databases for architects. This works. I do have the feeling that for UX or for design, sometimes it doesn't.
So Absolutely, and I think what we need is designers, direct UX people in every Agile team. You know, there's a great book, a book that's really inspired me, Lean UX, and basically the two guys who wrote it tried every possible combination. The only thing that really worked is having designers directly in the teams. They got the best results. And that, of course, doesn't mean that the designers in multiple teams aren't allowed to talk to each other. Of course, they are allowed to talk to each other, and they can actually achieve alignment through that means. Now, my understanding, I don't know much about the details, but quite a lot of the Google material design was actually achieved through that sort of emergent approach, in direct contrast to the Apple approach, which was much more of a design team creating from the top a design and then pushing that down. And if there's still people with the title creative directors, you can invite them to come to sprint review meetings, of course, and give their feedback there. So I guess our time is up. Thank you very much. Please don't forget to write your post-its and stick them to the wall at the back. Your feedback post-its, thank you very much. And if anybody has got any other questions about some of the things that I've talked about, I'm going to be here for the next day and a half, and it'd be great to talk to you. Thank you. Thank you.